First of all, I'd like to thank all the participants, especially our speakers from the overseas, as well as, of course, Professor Liu from Academia Sinica. Without their support, this wouldn't have been possible. Of course, the most important reason for this activity is that, there are many reasons that we should organize such a symposium. But the most important reason for us to hold this symposium is because in Taiwan, very few people actually pay attention to the connection here. Maybe not even the connection, but not even the neoliberalized phenomenon itself, let alone the connection between AI and neoliberalism. I think everybody has been, all over the world, I believe, but especially Taiwan, or for that matter, East Asia. People have been so mesmerized by, the advancement in AI technology that I think the whole society, including the Ministry of Education, or people who are responsible for stipulating educational policies, they kind of just jump on the bandwagon. Or maybe that's not the right expression. Maybe they're just kind of in a flurry to catch up with the train, lest they should be left behind. Left behind in what? In this scramble for a more thorough, liberalized human existence. But of course, like I said, most people are not aware that there is actually a neoliberal agenda there. Whether or not it's a conscious push on the part of some, corners of the world, or it's just a kind of a natural momentum of the late capitalist system. Looked at, from neither way, it's urgent, it's high time that we took a critical look at this, I would say, kind of recent phenomenon, the connection between these two. I think most people are not consciously connecting these two because, technology seems to be neutral. Or people actually would consider technology and science are neutral. They are not politically invested. But of course, it's a myth. Everything is political. And the rise of AI kind of coincides with the decline of neoliberalism. But on the other hand, we can't really count on this strange kind of connection as actually the decline of neoliberalism. It seems more like, actually, increasingly, it seems more like a recalibration of the neoliberal system by means of the development of AI. And, I think after our discussions today, it'll become obvious that, we are probably, due to the fortunate or unfortunate development of AI, we are actually in the process of ascending into a maybe neoliberalism point two. So, I think we, in talking about AI, we mostly are worried about, the AI products overtaking human beings in terms of jobs, as well as perhaps in the end, the existence of human beings. But in process, not in the process, that may be something we have to worry about, but that's way distant in the future. What is more pressing is actually what we are going to talk about today. So, without further ado, we'll just begin with our presentations. Thank you very much for participating. Also, we'd like to welcome people online, listening online. Thank you very much for attending this conference. Thank you.
So now we'll have our first talk of the day with Professor Hsien-hao Liao as the speaker and our chair, Professor Chung Wei-wen.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Wei-wen Chung from National Chengchi University. And I take it pleased me greatly that I'm the chair for this session, and it's an honor to introduce our distinguished speaker for this session, Professor Hsien-hao Liao, and he is the distinguished professor of National Taiwan University, and as probably all of you might know, he is also the dean of the Institute of Advanced Studies in the Humanities and Social Sciences. Please join me in welcoming Professor Liao, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Chung. Professor Chung is my kind of upper classmate at my alma mater, Stanford University. And I have benefited from being friends with him tremendously. And that's why I invited, he's also an expert on AI-related matters. And that's why I asked him to kindly host this session. What I'm going to talk about today is robotization and aristocratic radicalism. The reason, I designated myself as the first speaker is not because, I know better than all the other experts, but because, I'm the host, and therefore I kind of, I just consider myself as doing a kind of introduction or giving an introductory remark for a preface for the, one-day event. All right. Very recently, we saw this techno-optimist manifesto posted at the website of Andreessen and Horowitz, this venture capital company. And this statement, this manifesto includes approximately 108 statements divided into 15 parts. And at the very end, there's also a list of 56 people who Andreessen considered to be the techno-optimist, patron saints. So this is something that really aroused a lot of discussions, mostly negative, but actually, these people had quite a bit of followers too, especially in, I think, in the high-tech world. What he does in this manifesto is try to give the market logic of neoliberalism a philosophical face. So he's trying to do a cosmetic job for this, blatant rip-off market logic. What he advocates in this particular manifesto is that, unbridled or market-regulated development of technology will benefit everyone, just like the neoliberal theorists have argued for neoliberalism. And if technology is allowed unbridled development, then there will be unbounded human progress. So I think all he has in mind is just deregulation of everything, especially AI, cryptocurrencies, these really high-tech products. But at least one critic has termed this as a kind of a reincarnation of a very long tradition of aristocratic radicalism, which draws, in this particular case, Andreessen draws very heavily from Nietzsche and Hayek. In other words, it's a kind of right-wing elitism in a new packaging. Of course, what's interesting is what is the agenda behind? Is it just making money, or there's something else? Let's first take a look at the so-called aristocratic radicalism. This is actually a very long tradition in the West, which had inspired classical conservatives like Edmund Burke and Thomas Carlyle, as well as the consummate liberal John Stuart Mill. And I think everybody's very familiar with Thomas Carlyle's hierarchy, as presented in his Heroes and Hero Worship. In other words, only heroes. I mean, heroes are the main driving force of history, and of course they should rule the world too. And it's in Nietzsche that this doctrine acquires its most powerful, persuasive, and terrifying expression. The three fundamental truths, as enumerated by Nietzsche. First, there exists a natural ruling elite, an aristocracy, albeit not necessarily one rooted in property or title, possessing an exclusive remit to govern all of society. This is not actually enumerated by Nietzsche, but by Andreessen. Second, the principal problem of modernity is identified as the ever-increasing intransigence of the grey mass of ordinary human beings. Oh, sorry, this is Nietzsche. Of ordinary human beings. Our obstinate refusal to submit to the directives of our betters. Third, the aristocratic radical is convinced that at some point after the events of 1789, in which the French Revolution took place, our whole civilization has become imperiled, and that if we are to survive, elites must dramatically reassert their power over the ceaseless demands of the masses. Seeing the fact that he was trying to, he considers the event of 1789 a disaster. I think proves a lot, proves his elitist thinking. Nietzsche's variant of aristocratic radicalism is distinguished by its cultural bias. In other words, I think it's more or less, it has been more or less music to the ears of people in culture, poets, artists, writers. And that's why, Nietzsche has this, perennial appeal to this group of people, including me, when I was small. So for Nietzsche, culture considered as a sum total of the great creative personalities produced by our species, poets, artists, prophets, thinkers, stands at the top of his table of values. This is Nietzsche's brand of aristocratic radicalism. And so for Nietzsche, the production of great men of culture is the telos of our species. The whole of society, its political institutions and its social structures must be reorganized to facilitate the production of the great men of culture. And what about the other people, the masses? This is what Nietzsche has written in his book, Untimely Meditations. the young person should be taught to regard himself as a failed work of nature, a misfire of nature. But at the same time, as a witness to the grandiose and the marvelous intentions of the artist, nature has done badly, he should say to himself. But he will honor its great intentions by serving it so that one day it may do better. So those who are not as great should serve the great people of culture. They should make way. But Hayek did something with a sleight of hand. With a sleight of hand, he kind of transformed this Nietzschean idea of great men of culture into great men who can amass fortunes, wealth, by a sleight of hand. He turned the next most desirable qualification, the superior person, are those who have previously demonstrated their mettle in the tribunal of the competitive market. So if you're rich, then you are great, in other words. But of course, he used a different kind of rhetoric, so that you don't feel that, that's the smell of money. And Hayek equated individual greatness with amassing wealth. The age-old distinction between art and commerce, a conflict that has shaped so much aesthetic modernity, has melted away, wondrously. So people are no longer feel that making money is a problem. The richer you are, you become, the greater you are. But of course, Nietzsche is more honest. Okay. All right. This whole thing about techno-optimist manifesto, which was accepted by actually quite a few people. I mean, the big tycoons, is closely tied to the rise of the bro-oligarchy or bro-oligarchy, which is a new word coined by. Which is a new word coined from brotherhood or brothers and oligarchy. The so-called broligarchy is a fraternity of billionaires and enablers, especially in the Silicon Valley, almost exclusively male, often cloaked in impunity. They can say anything and do anything. And they are often, bloviators, like they speak pompously without being, truly criticized. But they tend to think of themselves as philosopher tycoons. We're not businessmen. We are philosophers. People like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, we just mentioned, and these people actually are part of the so-called New Right. Whose main the underlying drift of drive of this particular movement is a dissatisfaction toward and contempt for democracy, because democracy is ruled by the mob, whereas they prefer elite ruling, ruled by the elites. For instance, Peter Thiel actually said this: "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. So if you want freedom, then we have to get rid of democracy. If you want democracy, then you wouldn't have freedom. Incompatible." And this one guy from Stanford actually wrote this book called "What Tech Calls Thinking." I mean, all these people, Peter Thiel, Andreessen, they consider themselves philosophers who can actually think. But in this book, he just kind of looked at how they actually twisted, all these philosophers' work to adapt to their own purposes, silly purposes, or maybe not so silly, very well calculated agenda. And one person has especially won their hearts, who is Nick Land, who actually wrote this, Why the Elites Will Rule. He believes that, if the world, the development of technology accelerates fast enough, then the world would undergo a total transformation during which, it was turned upside down, where the masses no longer rule. So he's considered the father of accelerationism. Accelerated the technological development so that the world can, move into a faster gear where it will self-destruct, in other words, so to speak. And this whole movement also is closely connected to this so-called dark enlightenment, where de-democratization is one of the major themes. Dark enlightenment, you can tell from the word itself, is the reaction toward enlightenment. So it advocates the rejection of democracy, of egalitarianism, of enlightenment values, etc. I just explained Nick Land's views already. And the ultimate goal of dark enlightenment, of the new right, of the brothers in the oligarchy, is a network state, a new state, ruled by the oligarchs. Now we turn to, glorifies technology so much. So let's go back to the nature of technology. What does it actually do? Technology is, we're not here to completely, deprecate technology. But to be fair, technology is a double-edged sword. It humanizes the human beings as well as dehumanize them. Let me just give you an example of how technology, in very ancient times, has already done great damage to nature. One calculation suggests that skilled and wasteful human hunters took a mere 1,000 years. That was 6,000 years ago. Took a mere 1,000 years to exterminate most large-bodied game in North and South America. 6,000 years ago, they already killed most of these large-bodied animals. And another example is the Easter Island phenomenon. The Easter Island is located in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. And when the Europeans discovered that island, they found that on the island, people were eating, people almost had no food, but they still managed to survive on the island. And they figure that probably, a few hundred years ago, they already ran out of food. They have depleted the resources on the island, chopped down all the trees. When the Europeans found them, most of their canoes are patchwork, rather than, made from a whole tree. Patchwork, because there were no more trees. And they couldn't do actual, they could only do, fishing near the coast because of the, of their vessels. But the thing is, they actually managed to survive for another few hundred years, due to the fact that they were able to make do with very primitive kind of technologies. So, after the trees were chopped down, the soil would be blown away, right? So you had rock left only. But they managed to create soil by very low-end technology. so that they could grow, some vegetables there. And they also actually get meat from raising rats, which they brought from, elsewhere a long time ago. Things like that. In other words, technology prevented them from reckoning, from facing the real problem. The real problem is that they have wasted their resources. But technology prevented them from recognizing that fact until there's no more food. So some scholars argue that you can actually look at the Easter Island as a metaphor for the Earth. The Earth is also located in the middle of nowhere in the universe. And we have limited resources like the trees on that island. But technology can actually prevent us from seeing that Earth actually had limited resources. Yeah. We always think that technology can bring something, can solve our problems anytime we have a problem, as long as we keep developing our technology. Yeah. But of course, AI changed everything. I think what's central in our discussion of the present phenomenon of neoliberalism, especially the connection between AI and neoliberalism, is this calculation. In the ancient, very, very ancient times, the human beings began to develop the ability to count and therefore to calculate and begin to be able to survive better. So the ability to calculate actually helps. It was I think at least one of the most basic technology of using semiotic symbols to kind of organize the world, and being able to calculate help people to think about future. So before you can calculate, you just kind of survive on a daily basis. You have food and you survive. You don't have food, you can't survive. But gradually you can accumulate food and other resources for a week, and then a month, a year, several years, posterity, etc. But what happens? That's why there's this myth, Chinese myth about creating Chinese characters. The guy Chengchi created the Chinese characters, and then right at that moment, heaven rained grains and ghosts cried at night. Why? Because the human beings has now become something detached from the world, from nature, and they no longer need the gods as well as care about the ghosts, because they already become, from now on, will become the master of the world. But what happens is that once maybe not even after we entered into the era of capitalism, we begin to accumulate for its own sake. These big tycoons, these big tech businessmen. I mean, they earn so much money, but for what? For what purpose? It's just accumulation for accumulation's sake. Yeah. But I think there's an underlying drive, which is the drive to control. So the more you accumulate, the more you can control. But and again, control for control's sake. It's just a sense of a power that I think people enjoy. I mean, these people enjoy. But we may also enjoy that kind of sensed feelings too. But again, that's something we have to treat very critically. And so that's why we have algorithmic capitalism, where these big tech companies can control you so that they can make more money. But then, what's the purpose of making more money? It's the momentum of capitalism itself. So that's why, now that we are being controlled by algorithms, and we are ourselves the product that they are selling. And they're actually selling ourselves back to us too. And so in order to control, you need means for subjugation. And Google is a game changer. They initiated the surveillance capitalism. And so that's how they treated data, especially after artificial intelligence has come to their help. And the combination of this control of human behavior is, of course, manifested in Cambridge Analytica's successful manipulation of the Brexit vote. So, what we are facing now today, the challenge that we are facing now today is not technology itself, but law. But it's not laws that govern ethics. It's laws that prevent us from participating or becoming aware even of politics. So we have to worry about the time of singularity, the time when AI will actually rule the world. But it's a distant, very, very distant future. What we need to worry about today is, of course, the surveillance itself. And this surveillance turns Homo politicus, a political man, a human being, to an economic human being, where the human agents are supposed to be consistently rational and narrowly self-interested and pursue their subjectively defined ends optimally. This is, of course, the human being most desired by neoliberalism. And how do they create subjects for control? There are two complementary ways to make transparent, make human subjects transparent. First, of course, is to make them simple-minded, to give them less knowledge and self-knowledge, and therefore self-knowledge. And the second is to make them predictable. In other words, more like machines. And usually the kind of surface reason is to give you unbridled individualism. But the result is that extreme individualism would just make human beings, disconnect human beings with reality. They only know about themselves, their interests, their feelings and all that, but they don't care about the world, how other people feel. And that's of course, human robotization that I'm talking about today. That the human being would eventually become so predictable that, control is just so easy. And so, Homo economicus is the robotized human being. Because Homo economicus is a consistently rational and narrowly self-interested person. Completely predictable. And that's in fact our educational system is trying very hard to produce. Typical neoliberal person would be detached from the world, especially from its community, his community or her community, and this is what Stigler describes as the proletarianization of sensibility. You are deprived of your sensibility because of this isolation, because of this extreme individualism. And so everyone is left on his own. And so now neoliberalism asks you to be, since you are left alone, you need to be resourceful and entrepreneurial in order to win yourself a good life. Otherwise, you're done. Because there's no one. The government is very small. The government is not going to help you. The community is out of touch. So it's only you. And that results in further robotization. Because without help from the community or from the government, how can you be resourceful and entrepreneurial? But again, even that is not actually the real capacity that we need, which I will talk about later. And so the neoliberal system puts, especially the education system, puts very much emphasis on creativity. But this is a very one-sided understanding of creativity. Most of the time, the so-called creativity is characterized by these two traits: employment readiness. So you should be creative in order to be employment ready. You should be creative in order to adapt yourself to the rapid change of the world. Well, the government or the community, they're not going to help you. You are completely on your own. Yeah. So creativity is considered to be, very partially, of course, as describable and measurable. I mean, how can creativity be considered describable and measurable? It's not creativity anymore, right? And so one would just become a creative machine. And machines can be mass-produced. So what's left of humanity? I mean, if we want to argue against this homo economics, this economic man or woman or person, what can we rescue from our humanity, which is on the brink of becoming obsolete? So I like to emphasize that creativity is not unimportant, but there's another side of creativity, which is compassion. Compassion is not market-oriented. If you have no feelings, then you cannot create. But your feelings can be good or bad, right? There can be pernicious creativity too. So you need compassion. Then, with compassion, one can have positive creativity. So you can contrast, for instance, Faustian creativity and creativity underlain by compassion. I mean, Dr. Faustus has creativity too, but his creativity is heavily influenced, or even actually grown out of an exchange with devil. He exchanged his soul for knowledge, and soul, in this case, could very well mean compassion. And so, in the neoliberal world of competition, compassion will not, necessarily be destroyed at the very beginning of one's education. If education emphasizes competition, you have to be competitive and all that. I mean, that ties very easily in with extreme individualism, right? So, this capacity for compassion is a thing on which the future of human beings hangs. And only compassion can change this. What is that? Capitalist expansion and maximization of profit turns everything into resources. This we learned from Heidegger. And so everything is treated as standing reserve, waiting there for us to use. For instance, when you have all these rivers, and I think many people, when they look at rivers, they look at it as reservoirs for hydropower. So, and that's based on, this kind of worldview is based on the disenchantment of nature or world as a whole. So, what we need to do is to re-enchant. In order to have, to resuscitate compassion in us, we need to be able to teach the kids to have a re-enchanted view of the world. And that actually goes back, all the way back to the original understanding in Greek of technique. Technique can mean both art and technology, but we have forgotten the side of art. I mean, I'm not talking about Nietzsche's understanding of art here, but art is a form of compassion. And so, in the end, of course, I like to emphasize that posthumanism is probably one of the best ways, or best thinking, to defend against or to overcome accelerationism. And the posthumanism is based on hylozoism. Hylo means matter, zoe means life, meaning everything has life. But that's not enough. Having life does not necessarily mean that it's we should treat it as equal, right? And so we need to further, like I said, re-enchant the world with a new form of animism or panpsychism, which means we need to look at the world as indeed having a mental side to it too. So it has life, but it also has a mental side. In other words, the world can feel objects, animate of course, but inanimate objects too, they can feel. I usually do a demonstration with this to prove that this is not superstition, but maybe later. And so, this degrowth movement, which is winning more and more adherents, I wasn't sure whether they actually talk about this, but I do believe that this re-enchantment of the world, or the degrowth movement has to be predicated on this re-enchantment of the world. Otherwise, it would not really work. In the end, I just like to say that, with that in mind, if the world is actually enchanted in nature, then we'd be able to equal all things in the universe, as we say in Chinese Taoist text. And this is a very famous quote from Zhuangzi, one of the two classic Taoist texts. In this quote, his friend, Dong Guozi, asked Zhuangzi, what do you call the Tao? Where is it? Tell me, show me. Zhuangzi said, it's everywhere. And Dong Guozi said, give me an example so that I understand what you're saying. And Zhuangzi said, it's in the ants. The Tao is in the ants. And Dong Guozi said, in so low a creature? Zhuangzi said, well, it's in the weeds too. And Dong Guozi said, why? It gets even lower. And Zhuangzi said, it's in the bricks too. Dong Guozi said, no, it's truly low. And Zhuangzi said, it's also in piss and shit. Okay, thank you very much. Now, we welcome questions.
Hi, my name is Sel. I'm from Department of Global MBA. So I'm very interested when you mentioned about creativity, kind of kill the, like the contrast. The creativity can kill like the compassion when it's like focused on like too much capitalism. So I wonder like, is there any like way that it can balance? Because now like, I think the world we are living now, more or less we have to be in this moment that capitalism kind of like take over the world. So how can like we still be compassionate, but also can be creative?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the point. You have to combine compassion with creativity. The kind of neoliberal idea of creativity would kill human beings, not compassion, not just compassion. If you kill compassion, of course, you destroy compassion, you destroy the human beings. Then it then ends up with all these machines trying to destroy each other, right? Human machines trying to destroy each other. But then if you have compassion as your first principle, then you can still be creative without hurting people or the world, without hurting the other. So the point is compassion. And you have to instill, or actually I think kids, they already have the potential of compassion in them. It just, in the process of education, you destroy compassion in them by keep telling them that, you have to be competitive. You have to step on the dead bodies of other people in order to succeed, right? And that's neoliberalism. Neoliberalism tells you that you are all on your own. No one's going to help you, so you have to be very competitive, even at the cost of at the cost of hurting anybody, other people. All right, next question.
I think a few years ago people talked a lot about universal base income. And some people think of universal base income as a kind of socialist organizing, but I think some of the people you mentioned have been advocates of it, so how does it factor in your opinion?
Some of the people I mentioned, you mean whom?
I think Nick Land was a proponent of universal base income.
Uh-huh.
Some of the accelerationists, I think it sort of speaks to the robotization, because if everyone has kind of base living, then it's a very regulated way. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the idea of base income is, theoretically, presumably a good idea, right? So no one will live under the average living conditions. But I think it just, the difference is how you actually approach this idea. Out of contempt, so that you can keep them at bay, give them enough money so that you can keep them at bay. That's one idea. Right? Another idea is that they have human dignity, and therefore, people who are poor or who cannot win a lot of money is not because of their abilities. Very often it's because of the environment where they live in, or the history. For instance, a black person who lived in the slum, it was not because they want to be born in the slum. It was because the ancestors were sold to America as subhumans. Therefore, and when they were liberated, they were not given education at all, yet. So, sometimes that just kind of repeats itself. This is reproduce the same kind of people in the slum because of the circumstances of the environment, not because of their own abilities. So I think it's all a matter of whether or not, I mean, how you approach this matter. And socialism itself treats everybody as equal, right? Having the same kind of dignity. There are rich people and poor people, mainly because the social environments constrains their possibilities, not because of their own capabilities. But the neoliberal system would just say that, you couldn't succeed as a black people who grew up in a slum. You couldn't succeed because you don't work hard enough. See, you're not competitive enough. You're not creative. But it's not his own fault. It's the environment. It's a history that put them in such a situation. They work hard. I still remember reading this novel from Ralph Ellison called Invisible Men. This black writer grew up in the slum, and he never thought he could actually get out of that slum until one day he was reading literature and began to read literature and then realized that there are people like him in other parts of the world in history. And literature actually gave him the impulse to try to struggle out of the situation. But without the help from his teacher, it wouldn't have happened. But you usually don't have good teachers in those areas. So it's not humans actually live in a network rather than in vacuum. If you live in vacuum, then I can blame you for not working hard enough if you can't succeed. Because succeed is not my failure. What I'm saying is that for those who condemn the blacks for not having good achievement, they should reconsider, the human beings as living in a network, as living in an environment, as living in history, as living in politics.
Thank you, Professor, for hosting this conference, because I'm so excited. I haven't been so excited about something in a while. I think it's such a necessary conversation. So my question is, actually, Lu Laoshi and I and a few others are doing a nascent effort in degrowth. And one of the questions, at least I've wondered about, is obviously we don't agree that, with the Andreessen and Horowitz about the power of the elites being a natural law. But what has been true through recent history in other countries is that they are in power and very difficult to, they morph into different forms of power, right? So how can we, are you thinking revolution? How can we actually overthrow this power?
Good question. Yeah, I personally, if you look back on history, you realize that revolutions didn't change much. Right? Those who were oppressed would become the new oppressors. So, I personally prefer a more kind of gradual process. But degrowth is a good idea. But what I'm saying is that, in the U.S. there is the law of antitrust, right? Antitrust law, and they were actually. I read, the Biden administration was trying to put more restrictions on crypto, to put more regulations on cryptocurrency, and they were also thinking about impose a kind of billionaire base tax, and that's why Andreessen turned to Trump, because they don't want to be. They don't like the antitrust law, of course, right? They don't want any restrictions no regulations. Deregulation is God, right? And so, with laws you can, if they are actually implemented, you can actually change the condition where these big tech would become monopolies. Yeah. But now, of course, now that they have become monopolies, it becomes a lot more difficult. So, I don't have very, very pragmatic ways of doing these things. But, I think theoretically, we need to really re-educate people into compassionate beings, true human beings. One of the things that I've been doing, I consider myself an activist too. Unfortunately, didn't want to be, but in the past 2 years, I've been engaged in this activism against the bilingual policy. And the bilingual policy itself is a neoliberal, is a very, very neoliberal project. Because the government considers that if you can speak English, then you pay fluently, and then you can become competitive, right? Competitive in what sense? In getting a job, especially getting a job in the overseas, in one of the actually big economies in the West, right? And what? At what expense? At the expense of, really downgrading your Chinese. Everyone just has so much energy and time, right? You can't, according to my research, it's almost impossible for someone to master 2 languages. If one goes up, the other will go down. It has been experimented. It was experimented in Singapore already for about 14 years. And in 1979, they decided that, okay, they have to concentrate on one language, which of course is English, at the expense of all these mother tongues. Because it's impossible. They proved that it's impossible for anybody. Not for anybody, for so I can. But, language policies should not be designed for me, but for the general public. Okay, thank you very much. We have a round table at the very end of today's presentation. So, welcome to join us. Welcome to stay until then. Thank you very much.